friends, a family, having someone take the time to open a book with you and share that experience, right? Because when you read, it comes with heart. There's no way to read without it. At some point, your voice changes, you get excited, you start to show some emotion through it.
I feel like that's beautiful. And as I kind of sit here in my mind thinking about the role and the identity that AI plays in our lives, people think that it is so forward in the future, right? That it's so innovative and mind-breaking, right? And we're talking about books which are so grounded in a past of tradition that you're creating a beautiful blend of how these technologies come together to be able to incite and encourage people to read. So if I were to sign up for Worldreader, and I'm a dad or a mom or whatever, and I sign up, I pick from my thousands of titles that I have access to. You guys are using AI to be able to suggest books that will be very much like your ninth grade teacher that says, here's 12 books, start
That's
here,
right.
to be able to incite passion as we go through this journey together. Is that correct?
That is the vision, and that's where we're headed. Yes, absolutely.
All right, guys, welcome to a brand new episode of the Hart and Hustle podcast. Now, if you've been tuning into this podcast, you understand the intersection that we talk about of heart and hustle. Now, we're talking to an amazing leader today, Rebecca, who is the CEO of Worldreader. Now, in today's conversation, we're going to talk about her experiences growing up in a different country, being a global citizen, the importance of reading. We're going to talk about the crisis that's in front of so many of our young individuals today, our family culture, and how reading has become a little bit disconnected to the pastime that we've got to. And we're going to talk about how her organization is changing that to be able to put people in a better position to have more opportunities in life. Rebecca, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Keenan. Thanks for having me.
This is going to be a great conversation today. I really want to highlight not only the impact of Worldreader, but I also want to talk about what made you the amazing leader who you are today. Now, we've never had somebody on the podcast like you who is having such a global impact. And I want to kind of start off by talking about the person who sits across this digital table from me. So if I had to ask you a question, who are you? Without anything that is work related, how would you describe yourself?
Well, I think I'm well aligned because it's a lot of heart and hustle, right? And I'm glad I'm your first kind of global leader. That's part of your podcast series. Great to be here. Who am I? One, I am a person incredibly passionate about what I do every day, and that is to get children reading. But the question is, how did I get here, and like what inspires that? Definitely a global citizen. I had the privilege of growing up in West Africa in my younger years. And not many people can say that, but it gives you a real understanding of diversity and exposure to new ways of thinking, curiosity, and so forth. And my career both my upbringing through Europe, as well as my studies, led me to different parts of the world, including East Asia, Europe, Sub-Saharan Africa, North Africa. And it just strikes me that we as a global world have a lot of creativity and curiosity that could be harnessed to address some of the world's crises. And what we're striving to do as world readers is address the reading crisis that's facing our children today and will be continually facing them if we don't do something very, very significant over the next number of years.
Where are we calling in from today?
We're calling in from Atlanta, Georgia. I've been here for about 5 years, and we also have a lot of reading concerns in this country too. So global includes the United States.
I want to give us an opportunity to kind of talk about the impact on your life when you were growing up as a global citizen and all the different places that you've named. What are some of the biggest advantages that you think you experienced in being able to experience different cultures, different perspectives, and how do you think that kind of shaped your worldview? Because one of the things that I think we come across today is Americans specifically think that the world revolves around us. And the one thing that I recognize would do us a lot more good than bad is getting exposures to different cultures and perspectives. So let's kind of talk about how your experiences shaped your worldview in general.
I think it's interesting being a leader because when you read a lot of leadership books and so forth, or when you're forming teams, they always say form a team of individuals that have different perspectives than your own, right? And sometimes leaders don't want to do that. They want to bring those that are closest to them, so there's alignment and so forth. I think my upbringing, just the exposure to Senegalese culture, to Rwandan culture, to Japanese, to German, to Canadian, US, etc., brings all those perspectives together. And so it just naturally makes your worldview larger. And you start to realize there's a lot of commonalities. People have the same desire for their own success, for their own children's success. And there's a lot of art and beauty and understanding each other's cultures too, where you might think, oh, that mask looks like this, or you should be interpreting, and you realize it's something totally different and a beautiful story you'd never thought of. So I think my upbringing, both in terms of culture, but also my family was very committed to social impact. And that obviously kind of lines with your heart, a part of your podcast, in terms of really why do we do things? What gets us up in the morning? Even if you have a job that you feel like is not socially impact driven, doesn't mean that you're not volunteering or engaging and giving back to society in some way. I have the privilege of doing both in my day job, as well as part of my own personal passion.
Let's talk a little bit about the people who raised you. Being a part of a family that focuses on social impact is something that not a lot of people have the privilege to do. So what were the early days like? Can you take us back to like an early memory of like your parents doing some work and you were engulfed in just being with different cultures, and kind of what was that like?
So our neighborhood was, I was around a Senegalese neighborhood. My friends were Senegalese. I went to a Senegalese preschool and kindergarten, which was wonderful. I have to admit, I didn't realize that I wasn't Senegalese at that time. When you're small, you're just kids play, you're part of the community, which is wonderful. I think I always saw my parents reaching out, always, people coming in, needing help, supporting them in some way, whether that was anything from come sit around the table with us, or we're having a children's club. And my mom, having been a third grade teacher, always had and still does. She's 84, still has a lot of creativity into what she can bring and give to others. And so I think just living in that type of dynamic, and also having parents that expect that of you, like what else are we doing? How are we contributing? Is very motivational.
It's a beautiful story. I always think that we underestimate, right, our early childhood development and exposure to different ideas and different cultures. I was privileged enough to be born in a mixed family. My dad is Black, my mom is white.
Mm-hmm.
And so I
Mm-hmm.
saw how the different cultures approach different types of topics. And when I was 7 years old, we moved to Detroit, Michigan. And part of my early exposure to being different was I was one of the only mixed children, right, in my school
Fascinating.
district,
Mm-hmm.
which was really interesting to me. And part of my story was, I think I shared this previously, we moved to Michigan in 1997. My mom's going to put us into a school district. She finds out that we are going to be the first children of color in this school district in
Oh, wow.
1997. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
And so she ended up putting us into a small Lutheran school. And one of
Okay.
the things that I think we can riff on a little bit was my education process at an early age was not good. And unfortunately, I did not have the ability to get great exposure to reading comprehension. And it created ripples downstream about how I wasn't really able to have confidence in my education process. It shaped my view of education, which made me go
And
down some
yourself,
different
right?
paths, and myself. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that you had mentioned to us in our previous conversation was the global literacy crisis that we're in. And in some countries, 9 out of 10 children cannot read by the age of 10. Let's kind of talk about that global problem and where that comes from.
I just have to repeat it. I mean, the average statistic is 2 out of 3 can't read, but in some of the sub-Saharan African countries, it's 9 out of 10. I mean, you just think of anything that's 10 and 9 of them, right? You think of a boat, it would tilt if the world, it would sink if we really are depending on just 10% of the population to kind of solve all the world's challenges. And what are we missing, right? Um, just speaking with someone in public health today, and they were saying, gosh, there's not much you can do without reading. And where does it begin? It really begins right at birth. I think just to go back, your story is so interesting, Keenan, because you've overcome some challenges, but I think there's so many kids because we weren't exposed early to a lot of content and rich stories. It starts to shape. Can I be a good reader? You compensate in different ways, and so I think it's pretty solvable, but it does take some commitment early on in a child's life. One of the things I think I'd shared with you before, which brought me into this, was just the whole notion of children being in child labor and not exposed to education or trafficking of individuals and children. And that really, I did that for a small segment of my career, but it really struck me as foundational to education was so foundational and often a reason why they were trafficked or they were in labor conditions that were unacceptable. And so it started me thinking what's foundational is reading and why we have these huge statistics, even though we've invested millions and billions of dollars into school systems, right? We build schools, we innovate labs with technology and so forth. But my goodness, if we haven't started earlier and we haven't invested in the young kid at the home and building those literacy skills, we've missed a huge opportunity of building that cognitive the creativity that the brain fosters until the age of 4. I don't think many people know that most of our brains are formed by the age of 4 or 5. And then after that, we're playing catch up. So if you haven't actually had that exposure and all those neurons working, you really are going to have to take a bigger step forward when you begin to actually learn to read. But it's solvable. It's called reading as a family, having someone take the time to open a book with you and share that experience, right? Because when you read, it comes with heart. There's no way to read without it. At some point, your voice changes, you get excited, you start to show some emotion through it. So I'm sure you've had some of those experiences as well.
Absolutely. I just think about, some of the one of my favorite sayings is from another business leader, and he talked about the way in which we pass down knowledge through history was either in oral tradition or in written
Mm-hmm.
tradition. And we've seen a huge transformation in why people write books today. It's often grounded in a need for publicity, a need for fame. You see a lot of people saying, I'm a 3-time author, I'm on the New York style seller bestsellers list, all that type of stuff. But that wasn't the case back in the day. We were trying to pass down stories and information that other people could reference. And I've seen so many amazing business leaders say all the secrets to what you're looking for are inside of these books. You just have to spend the time to read them. So why, if that is so true, why do you think we have such a macro problem with the adoption of reading in our societies today from the world reader perspective, but also maybe some current macro cultural issues as well?
Oh, it's a great question. Why do we have some of these issues? I think one is we're on information. We're in the information age, right? And in order to digest information, we digest it in very small bits and pieces, right? We're all about the sound bite, about how it affects us emotionally, telling our story, a lot of empowerment. And obviously, social media is huge. It has a tremendous benefit, overall, but it can also have some detriment to it as well, or if it's not used from a time perspective wisely. I think for us, as a world reader, because our mission is really to get children reading, but to do so by working with parents and caregivers across the world, to really change or replace a certain amount of time every day that they're on social media or using their phone to using that as a tool of engagement with their children, having that discussion and using reading and activities as a vehicle to do that. But I think if we forget the power of social media, we'll have done ourselves um, we'll have created a gap in how we can help address the crisis, because social media can be a huge positive influencer, right? If we get influencers telling the story of like parents, caregivers, you're 26, you have a 2-year-old, spend 10 minutes today doing this activity or this reading engagement with your child. They're listening, right? We're all looking up to different influencers. And so I think the more we can leverage social media and digital marketing in a strategic way, we have a chance to use it for good, and not just self promotion, but really promotion of a family unit or more family cohesion around reading. I don't know. You read a lot, obviously, in what you do, from leadership books to probably just some nonfiction, or you look at influencers as you're building your podcast. And I think reading, gosh, it doesn't matter what we read with our children as long as we're providing them that exposure. Their worlds are building, right? And that's exciting to see.
And I feel like it's a tried and true platform to get the imagination going, right?
For
Here's a question.
sure.
Did your parents read with you when you were a kid?
Okay, so there's the reality is they didn't do enough reading with me. So
Mm.
I have two older siblings, one that was 10 years older, a sister that's now deceased. And I think I was the surprise child, and they're like, oh, we're too busy. We didn't read a lot. So I was a struggling reader. But I finally had a teacher said, you are going to find someone, and really instructed my mom to sit down and start reading with me. But I was pretty late in the game. And then in ninth grade, I had an English teacher that said, your reading is just too far below the average. Like, here are 12 books you're going to read over the summer. And I looked at my stack of books, Tina, and I was like, no
12
way.
books. Yeah.
12 books. I was like, I don't think I could do that. But she was a smart teacher. She ordered them for me. She's like, you're going to read them in this order. And after the first book, I fell in love with reading, and kind of the rest is history, as they say. I realized how much it changed, and probably you had a little bit of that experience too in your schooling. Just getting the right books in the right hands, to the right children. So that's why you need a lot. You need exposure to a lot, and I'm really proud of Worldreader's um, high quality children's book collection against around 5 languages. We have over 3,000 titles in Arabic, Spanish, English, Kiswahili, and Hindi. And why is that? We've curated and we've really sought the best because we want kids to be engaged, and we want them to find books that um, they can see themselves in, but they can also visit the world, right? They can see what else is happening globally, in perspective of content.
That's a powerful statement. Visit the world, right? I've heard so many of my friends as I've gotten older. I really have two kind of camps, right? The people who don't often read, which now that I'm
Right.
older, I think like, how are we not reading some of these amazing pieces of literature that
Sure.
came from some of the smartest people in the world as they pass down knowledge to us?
Mm-hmm.
But the other side is a group of friends who are avid readers, people who would literally bomb through the entire series of Harry Potter or World of the Rings and everything like that. And they're always talking about how they love it because it's almost an escape from reality and it takes them to a different place. And I think about that as being so healthy instead of the form of escapism that we kind of see in social media today, when the average 18-year-old is spending 9 hours per day on their device. And if you
Scary,
extrapolate that through the rest of their life, it's 24 years of time on screen time. But
right?
what opportunities did we miss to challenge our perspectives, hear a different point of view, but also learn from people who have been through similar situations? And this is why I love hosting the podcast. I wanted to start off with your story. When we share our own story, it's easy for us to find each other in it. And just
Mm-hmm.
listening to your early exposure of saying, I wish my parents would have read with me more. I feel the same way. I didn't have that because my parents were very busy. But now let's kind of talk about the dichotomy of these little devices, right? You guys are
Are
using
they great?
technology. They're
Uh-huh.
amazing. They're supercomputers. They're never, anybody who's listening and watching to this, I will bet $20 says that your phone is not without arm's reach away from you, right?
Exactly, or like physically on your body.
Literally on your
Oh.
lap or something. But the thing I
Mm-hmm.
think about today is if an average 18-year-old is spending that much time on their device, one of the things that we mentioned in our previous conversation is the challenge of isolation and loneliness. When mom and dad are also on their device consistently, we miss so many opportunities for that human connection. And I worry about the times, if we extrapolate that out through history, the opportunities to share moments of connection and exploration and creativity with our children, have them ask questions. And that's why I love your guys' mission, because you're using the parents as a vehicle to reverse engineer the passion for reading. Why are you
You
guys
said it
choosing
better
to
than
do
I
it
could.
that
I'm going to
way?
use that line, Keenan. Reverse
There we
engineer.
go.
I love it. Thank
There
you.
we go. Yeah. So why is that so important? Let's riff on that.
Oh my goodness. I mean, think who's our first teachers, right? There's this line, parents are your child's first teacher, but I mean, every child that's made it to month one has had someone care for them, right? They've changed their diaper, they've washed them, they've fed them, right? And it just continues on. But often we forget that in that process, if we were actually reading and storytelling to these um, own kids that we care for, it's game changing for them. That's how they build language, right? It's because parents talk to you. Otherwise, you could be speaking Spanish and English. You see these kids that have parents and, multilingual, they're able to do 3 or 4 languages at once, right? The brain is so receptive. And so it's such a great opportunity. And at the same time, parents often don't know how rewarding it is if they invested this time. So technology, that's why Worldreader is committed to using mobile, everybody's mobile phone. We don't pass out hardware deliberately because it's like, hey, it's not scalable, number one, but two, everybody does have a phone. And if they don't, they'll soon have one, depending on where they are in the world. And it's their vehicle, it's their tool to the world, but it's also their best tool to engage with their own families, as a family and reading to their children. I feel like we say it a lot, but it's such a hard behavior because it's much easier to say, I'm too tired, I don't have time, I'm busy, whatever it is. But if parents start to experience just that little bit of extra connection, it's pretty game changing from a behavioral standpoint because there's a bond that starts to exist between that child and parent that continues to grow. And the other thing is, we're all stressed parents, right? We're all working, running jobs and so forth. But boy, it relaxes us. We forget that suddenly for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, we're like, oh, we didn't really think about anything else because we too are engrossed in the story. We have found in some of the communities that we work that parents, don't even know that they should play with their children. Not that they don't want to do it, they just don't know. It's been kind of pushed aside with the demands of the day, but you could bring just cooking over a coal fire, right? You can play a little game of counting. You can do all sorts of fun things around just the everyday cooking in any culture that we're at. So I think it's just reminding that we're all here, um, kind of as one global society trying to raise the next generation of leaders. And the more that we can share the tips and resources on a platform that's easily accessible to everyone, the easier it will be, right? And hopefully we can bring other friends and family, extended family from other cultures along the way.
Earlier in our conversation, you mentioned that you were talking to a leader from public health. I want to kind of get a better understanding of what do you do as the CEO of Worldreader? Like, what are some of the conversations you're having? What are some of the problems that you're trying to tackle? And what are some of the biggest challenges I think that you're trying to formulate a plan to overcome in the communities and the organizations who you're engaging with? Like, what does your game plan look like to kind of tackle this challenge from your seat?
Thank you, because it's exactly what I just said to this public health leader. And I think one of the biggest challenges for the education sector is that some people won't like me saying this, but it's probably the least innovative of sectors. We feel very traditional about our school and public school and what it should do and so forth. And so kind of breaking out of that mold is really hard. Public health has always been a little bit more agile because they're responding to disease and immediate responses are critical. And reading is long term, right? It's a long term engagement strategy that you're in. Part of my mission for Worldreader is really to say, can we situate reading outside of the education system? Can it really touch other sectors? Can it be just as central to the conversation of climate change as it is to maternal and child health or child well-being? Can we work with pediatrics? Um, really trying to see it as it's vital for society, even if the education sector doesn't come along, as long as we're addressing it within these other sectors at home, we're going to begin to change the trajectory of the crisis as it moves forward. So for me, it's a real passion to say, how do we sit reading right in the center of society? Because we know it brings better democracy, it brings better health, it brings better job opportunities. All of that is long proven. But because it's a long term game, it's not a short term game, and it requires individual behavior change. Gosh, we all know that's hard, right? Trying to lose 10 pounds is not easy. You got to stop what you're doing and so forth. Same with changing, how you become a parent. And if you haven't had good parenting models, that's also like, you're like, I don't know, like, I'm just doing what my parents did to me. We know that repeats itself generation over generation. So I think there's a lot of us, a lot of thinking around the behavioral science that needs to be applied to it. And there's some great leaders out there that are doing that, really thinking around behavior. One of them that I have grown to appreciate is out of the University of Chicago, Ariel Khalil. She's done
Okay.
and her team have done a lot around parental behavioral change in the Chicago area, and I find her studies really, really interesting.
Why do you find them so interesting? Let's kind of take it. Let's double click on
Because,
that.
yeah, no, I mean, I mean, they've done everything from videoing parents to how they read with their children to understand the reading gains, how much time is required per day for families to read to see the change. Like those, she's really getting very specific about what moves the needle, like what happens in the household that's going to move the needle. And so we look, at some of that research and say, okay, now we're in a different context. Let's say we're in Kenya or we're in South Africa or we're in Ghana. Like, how do we do that within that cultural context and start to figure out the routines? Because at the end of the day, life is building routines, right? Healthier routines as we go forward. So, looking, maybe that gives a little bit more like, how do we strengthen those routines within the family, but in a context that is appropriate, culturally relevant, and that you kind of have to look at country by country, even sometimes community by community.
There's also an underlying sense of accountability in that
Mm.
message, which can be kind of
Hmm.
challenging. One of the biggest subconscious points of friction that I've always kind of recognized, and this is an opportunity for me to kind of like riff this out in my head. When I was born in 1990, right, I grew up. And as I got older, I started hearing people from an older generation start pointing fingers of judgment and saying, you guys don't know how to talk to anybody anymore. You can't communicate, no interpersonal communication skills. You're an eighth place trophy generation, right? But naturally, the question that popped into my head was, who were the people who raised us? Because it wasn't me, the fifth grader, going in and saying, Mom, I want an eighth place trophy, for this tournament that I'm going to go
Sure.
in. It was the parents, right? And I think one of the biggest points of accountability that we really need to kind of lean into is when we bring children into this world, when we have influence over a younger generation, it's to help them be better. It's to help them not make the same mistakes that we made. And I feel like that lens of accountability and looking at the parents to say, how can you engage with your children to give them better opportunities and a bigger foundation that they can grow upon is a conversation that we need to have more instead of casting that easy pointed finger while ignoring the three fingers that are pointing back at us, if that makes sense.
Totally. I mean, I think that's why you've heard me say over and over again, we're focused on the parents, right? And caregivers. You've probably heard me say less about the children themselves because really from 0 to 8, it's all about the parents' support and engagement. And how do we come alongside them? How do we actually give them the pat on the back or the recognition that's needed when they're doing it well, and they've tried something new because we all need that, whether it's a neighbor saying, gosh, that was a great tip you just offered us and now I'm going to implement it. We learn from each other because parenting is not easy and every child's different and you don't know what you're going to inherit, right? As part of that process. So I can't agree with you more. I thought it was interesting yesterday. They had the public health did a whole study on the parent stress. I don't know if you saw that. Like
No,
how
please
can we
share.
address? I can't think of the citation right now, but just that we need to understand that parental stress is a real reality and it's causing an effect on child development. And I thought it's true because parents are they think that we need to go do all these things for our children, right? When in essence, to your point, we just need to sit and talk with them. And sometimes the tools that we need most to engage with them are right there on our phone, right here by sitting around the table, creating some family time to eat together. Um, some of those basic things that I think your grandparents would have, been pointing the finger at they're not hard. They don't cost any money. They just cost commitment and creativity to try. And so if we can continue to put some of that through social media, some of that more on the news, I think it's important. And your other half of your passion, I think, is mental health, right? And this is a lot about mental health, building little kids up and strengthening them, but having parents that are also mentally positive in their outlook about where we're going. Part of our collection you may be interested in is called, we have like a social emotional learning collection. It's called My Special Word. I don't know, and where kids get to pick a word and live into it. And I think it's really, really a powerful notion. It came out of an organization in Ohio, a gentleman named Dwight Smith. And he said, I feel so strongly that we should live a word, like own it and live into it. And so we've created a whole collection of books of courage and joy and peace and kindness, inspired by kids that say, this is going to be my word. I'm going to live by it and own it.
There is another influencer, and this is going to be a segue into kind of our conversation about leadership and how you're influencing this next generation, right? There's a guy, his name is Gary Vaynerchuk, goes by
Okay.
Gary V on social media. Okay. So this book that he released in 2022, and my marketing director, Dante, says like I should get a QR code for how many times I plug this book, but it's called 12 and a half, which is leveraging
Okay.
the emotional ingredients necessary for business success. And this is all about the development of soft skills.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is directed at adults, but one of the other things that Gary has done, which has been amazing, I want to show you this. On my shelf here,
Yes.
is what Gary has created. So this is genuine giraffe.
Okay.
So Gary Vaynerchuk has taken his next phase of business is to try and recreate his own world of Disney. But what he does is he personifies and creates characters around character traits that you're going to need to be successful. Gratitude gorilla is another one that's over there. Genuine giraffe is something that's here. And he talks about how we need to do a better job of exposing our youth to these types of ideas. And so I incredibly appreciate how you guys are collaborating to live that one word. If you had to live one word for the rest of 2024, Rebecca, what would your word be?
My word is wonder. I picked wonder because I think it's really about envisioning how I can bring a team to help drive this impact even more deeply into the communities that we're working with. And, we talk a lot about curiosity, and I'm currently in the process of envisioning and thinking about what type of new values we need for our organization. Sometimes you need to refresh them as you journey through different phases of an organization. And I mean, this is just fresh thinking, and I've been thinking I really want to live into one that exists today. It's called Bold. We've owned that value for a long time. And I think addressing this challenge that we have around the reading crisis is bold because no one's solved it yet. It's going to remain with us for the years to come. And yet it's so foundational. So what can we do in our actions that are bold? And I think Worldreader with our Book Smart application is really trying to do that. The other one is data, right? Data is everything from AI. You can't live in the 21st century without being data driven. But data for what purpose, right? So how quickly can we be agile? We're always scrappy as nonprofits. So how do we be agile and smart about our decisions? But the other two that I've been thinking about is obviously curiosity, because that kind of goes with wonder. But dynamic. I'm a multicultural organization. We're virtual. I lead a virtual team. We only have one office in Nairobi. The rest of us are around the world. And so figuring out how do you build a team virtually? Some of us we've never even met. So that takes a lot of interest in each other, right? But I think more so than anything, the 2024 value we're trying to live into is transparency, because that ability as a team to be free to admit failure, to admit success, to identify where the challenges are, it's not a very common value today in like being real. And so we're really trying to be as real as we can week on week with the progress we're making. When we don't make progress, why? But not casting judgment on it, because we're all striving for the same mission as we go forward.
And the only objective, really, if we kind of boil this down to first principles, right, is to not stop. And so
Not
being
stop.
able,
And how can we
can't stop.
accelerate?
Right. And how can we
Stop.
accelerate? I mean, I've been trying to
Yeah.
think about these things as I build my personal business and as I try and build my team. And there's a lot of pressure in the world of being a nonprofit. There's a lot of pressure when you have a big mission to go incredibly fast. But when you think about the things that have stood the time or the time of test of time, they've been the ideals that people can stand behind consistently
Hmm.
for a really long time. And I feel like your mission of getting people to lean back into the bold idea of having transparent conversations, opportunities of connection with our children is a bold idea that we need to get back to, because we touched a little bit on this, and the fact of social media and everything else is playing somewhat of a distraction in our lives. And I feel like if we're going to be able to build a sense of community again, we have to come together, and we have to find a medium to be able to come back together. And I wish I would have had, and my parents did an amazing job raising me. I wish I would have had more traditions that were about
Mm,
coming together as a family, because those are the things that are passed down. And I feel like that's what you are on the cusp of really
we
kind of
are.
infusing
That's right.
into our society.
I can't agree more. So that you've articulated well. We are trying to create tradition, right? Using reading as the vehicle to do that and opening up the different types of conversations that come through exposure to various themes, right? And every family can adopt new traditions or pass them down from their parents, right? I think reading also reminds people of traditions that they've forgotten about. Or, like, oh, we used to do that. Why don't we do it again? You just forget. Not that there's any deliberate nature of forgetting, it just happens. And so reading often and exposure to books kind of reminds you of some of those elements. I think you just made a point though about the social media angle and telling the bold story. I think we just need more champions, right? That are willing to share, just like you are, shifting some of their media time to telling some of these realities that are out there about being transparent in the world and how people can get involved. And I think like your Gen Zs and millennials are super excited to I mean, they're evaluating organizations and companies by their values now, right? So how can we be really clear about what are some core values that they can participate in and really contribute to making the world a better place?
I mean, I'm gonna take a more of a philosophical ethos perspective on this. I Whenever I have conversations like this, something deep down in my heart like feels a little bit emotional, right? I feel like a little bit of emotion just boil up behind me, because I feel like we're in a time in society where we are all starting to come out of the haze or the fog, where we've been spending so much time pursuing things and pursuing ideas and comparison and everything else that has left us feeling so depleted, right? And I've seen the pendulum swing with so many of my other friends who are like, me personally, I'm not even on Instagram. I'm not on TikTok. I'm not on these things. I'm leaning back into reading because I
Mm-hmm.
feel so much more fulfilled when I can give myself the space to be able to think and be present. And I feel like there's a large part of society that's starting to wake up from the fog that we've come from, with the inundation of alerts and buzzes and notifications and little
It's
dopamine
true.
spikes that have been engineered from a business perspective to keep us coming back to things. It almost feels like a little undertone of like the Matrix, right? When we're like waking up and taking the red
Totally.
pill, you know what I mean? I just feel like deep down,
That's
we are
funny.
yearning for that sense of connection. And that sense
Mm.
of connection often starts with self first before it starts with other people.
That's, yeah, 100% agree. I think, something that you just said there was, going on to any of the content platforms, Netflix, whatever, it's overwhelming sometimes to choose, and they do a really good job of recommending, right, what's next for you. And that's something that Worldreader, trying to incorporate AI into our platform and really as part of that reading routine that I was mentioning earlier. So many parents don't even know where to begin. So it's like, how can we help them on that process? But also, while we have loads of content, how do we make it simple for them to take that first step, the fifth step of reading a book on up as they, journey over the years and years reading on Booksmart?
I feel like that's beautiful. And as I kind of sit here in my mind thinking about the role and the identity that AI plays in our lives, people think that it is so forward in the future, right? That it's so innovative and mind breaking, right? And we're talking about books, which are so grounded in a past of tradition, that you're creating a beautiful blend of how these technologies come
For
together to be
sure.
able to
Right.
incite and encourage people to read. So if I were to sign up for Worldreader, and I'm a dad or a mom or whatever, and I sign up, I pick from my thousands of titles that I have access to. You guys are using AI to be able to suggest books that will be very much like your ninth grade teacher that says, here's 12 books, start
That's
here,
right.
to be able to incite passion as we go through this journey together. Is that correct?
That is the vision, and that's where we're headed. Yes, absolutely. And I think one of the first books that anybody can read is my huge tiny library, which is really a sweet book about the power of reading on your phone, and that it's anywhere, anytime available to you as a parent. Um, but it also reminds me, I did want to share this book. It's when you think about getting people excited about it. We have a book that we recently released called Zuri's Gift, and it's about a maybe 4 or 5 year old girl who's getting a birthday gift, and she saves her favorite one to last, which is from her aunt. And her aunt lives in Nairobi, Kenya. And her aunt actually, the gift is to take her on an adventure. And the adventure is to save elephants from being poached for their tusks. And at the end, as she's crawling into bed, she just said, "Oh my goodness, I've had the most amazing gift ever, the adventure of having gone through this story and living this story." And I think that's really what we want to inspire, right? Little dreamers, but also parents that are giving that gift, that dreaming opportunity and aspiration for their children to see the world in a more beautiful light.
A story of inspiration. I feel like we've been able to articulate a little bit of that today because I feel incredibly inspired to once again, in my times of relief from all the hustle and bustle of the day, right, to be able to open up a book and spend time with myself and go into this world of adventure that I feel like is so powerful. When you are on such a big mission, you have to cast a vision as a leader so large
Mhm.
that other people can find themselves inside of it. How are you thinking about casting a vision big enough to get people who are listening to this podcast, who are watching this podcast, who are inspired by their experiences in reading and they're yearning for more, to be a part of becoming a team of Worldreader? How are you kind of thinking about
Mhm.
that stuff?
I think it's the first step is think who's in your network that's young that you could read to or you could inspire and give a book to. At the end of the day, we all have someone who's young in our lives. And instead of getting maybe some other toy or gift card, pick a book out for them. And if you have no money, then please download Booksmart and offer a book, share a book with them. I think taking the motion to stop and say, if we're a leader or if we're actually working or we have any form of literacy competency, then somebody helped get us there. And who helped get us to that stage? Often we don't remember. It happens through time. We don't remember how that process happened, but it did start early. And so we all have, I think, kind of a moral obligation to give back in that regard to the next generation. We invite anybody to join us and be part of our journey. I think number one is just read. If you're an advocate for reading, tell our story, tell about Worldreader's story, encourage people to download Booksmart. It's a very easy word. You can find it on any app, the Play Store or the Apple Store, available around the world. And pick a language, that you want to be able to read in. Um, but I'd say check out Zuri's Gift on it. It's such a powerful story. And I don't, whether you're 65 listening to this podcast or you're, 18 trying to figure out what you're doing next, it will inspire you.
I want to use the final minutes here of our podcast to have an honest and open conversation. So I want you to go back into the Rolodex of all the amazing books that you've read throughout your life.
Oh.
And I want you to pick out two books, two books that you've read
Mhm.
that you feel like you can easily go back and say, this is something that changed my perspective. This is something that inspired me. This is something that I want other people to experience the same way I did. Talk
Mhm.
about the first book really quick, and I'm going to grab mine off my shelf and then I'll share.
Okay. Like, is mine right here? Yeah, mine is right here. The first book is probably not one that anybody's going to necessarily pick up reading, but it's the one that changed my reading, and that was A Separate Peace by John Knowles. And probably no longer on any curriculum. It's old, but it for some reason connected with me in such a deep way that of my 12 books, it encouraged me to read going forward. So that I always go back to. It was, for whatever reason, one of the most transformative stories for me. And it's about boys in boarding school and, kind of going through their growing up experience and life. And maybe it's where I was too. So it's super interesting. The second
My
one
first,
is,
oh,
yeah,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
I'm
No,
gonna
no.
go my first one. Okay,
Yeah,
so
please.
my first one is Think and Grow Rich by
Okay.
Napoleon Hill. So
Hmm.
this is a special book to me because this was the literal first book that I was given. I was
Oh,
23 years
wow.
old, and this is
Okay.
just when I was thinking about becoming an entrepreneur. And my father has been very successful in business, and he was one of the people who has literally leaned into the fact if you can see it in your mind, you can
Hmm.
become that version of yourself. And this was the first book that I was ever given, and it's his book, literally. And it just kind of really started to think about, or have me think about, the thoughts that I have the ability to impact the world that I'm in. And so if you can think, you can also grow rich through your thoughts
Hmm.
and ideas. And I've always been somebody who's been innovative. I've always had the ability to see around the corner. Now, have I taken a lot of flack and have I been early on some things because of it? Absolutely. But I think this is something that a lot of people should read because it has so many foundations for being a leader, for casting a
Hmm.
vision, and for believing so much that your ideas become reality. So, what's your second one?
I love that. I'm going to check that out. But I'm struck that that was your first book at age 23, right? I
23.
think,
So that talks about my entire experience, right? Of reading.
yeah,
I was given other
that's
books
right.
when I was like a kid for sure, but like this was the first one where I was like, I think
Yeah,
this is going to have a huge impact on me. And I took it
right.
seriously, the process of reading it. And so
Hmm.
I need to come back to this as well.
Yeah, that's great. The other book is just this year. I had a very good friend who gave me the book Multiplier. I don't know if you've heard of Multiplier. And, she said you need to read this in your new role as CEO and to think about how do you move that team and bring the best skills that they have to the forefront. So it is highly marked up. It has page turns, and it's been really helpful just to think through a virtual team. How do I do that? Because I don't see them all the time. Thinking through how do you allow them to feel like they are giving even more than they think that they could give and be rewarded in that process.
Oh, I love that. That's so powerful. That's been a big maturation process of me being a leader of my company is I feel like early in our days as leaders, we think we have to do it all. But when we can give trust and we can empower others, maybe it might feel a little scary, right? Because we're like, oh, I'm out of control. And if you're a leader, you often want to be in control. But the best leaders recognize that if they empower the people around them, you will be judged by the progress of the group, not yourself individually. And I was talking to
Right.
somebody else on the podcast the other day, and we were using the analogy of being a shepherd, right? The
That's
shepherd
lovely. Hmm.
protects this flock, enables them to do things, brings them to food, and is always there to take care of them. Now, my second book, and you saw a little bit earlier, is Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Okay.
Have you read this book?
I haven't, but my son has. He's 11.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Oh my, he's way ahead of me. Okay. So I recently bought this, I think in the last 2 years, because I
Okay.
listened to it first on Audible and then I read it.
Hmm.
And it was just so profound because one of the biggest things that he talks about is the idea of lagging indicators. So,
Hmm.
if you're building habits for yourself, small little changes today over a
Hmm.
long enough time horizon can compound. And the example that he uses is 1% better each day equals
Hmm.
37 times better at the end of the year. And often our
Yeah,
brain
that's
is very
powerful, isn't
bad,
it?
incredibly. Our brain is really bad about thinking what we can accomplish. It overestimates what we can accomplish in 1 year, but underestimates what we can do in 10 years. And I want to wrap that
Mm.
back to the point that I made earlier. The objective of being on the mission is to not stop because we
That's
can't
right.
even quantify how many lives Worldreader is
Hmm.
going to be able to impact over the next 2, 3 decades and the lives
Hmm.
and ideas that you will inspire. And so, Rebecca, I just want to say this has been an amazing conversation. I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. And I really, really, really appreciate our time that we've spent together and just learning more about your passion and the mission that you are on. I want to give you the last couple minutes here to close by saying, how can people find out more about you guys? Maybe you can
Hmm.
articulate the vision of what you're going to be doing over the next couple of years, and how can we help?
Hmm. Great. Well, thanks for having me. Great to have this conversation with you too, Keenan. Um, Check us out, worldreader.org, www.worldreader, all one word.org. And I would say first and foremost, download Booksmart. That's our platform with all our content on it, and encourage anybody in your network to read, even adults, and to use that as a vehicle to read with you. Any type of children, promote it. If you're sitting in a doctor's office and you see a little kid sitting there, encourage that reading. We obviously are a nonprofit. We're always grateful for support, financial support to continue our mission as an ed tech organization. We're really striving to have the best technology available to anyone, right? In any community that has really low resources and doesn't have the ability to um, pursue as many tangible books and so forth. So that's part of our engagement. So our mission, very simple, Keenan, right? We want to get children reading, but we want to do it by empowering parents and celebrating them. So if you're listening to this podcast, then I encourage you as an influencer or even just an advocate within your own faith community, your own business, what are we doing to give back to ensure that this next generation and the parents that are raising these kids have the support that they need for us to address the reading crisis?
Remember, mom and dad, you might not be famous on TikTok or Instagram, but you are the influencer in your house. And that's the type of
You're
influence that we're
here.
looking for. Yeah. Well, that's
That's
been an
right.
amazing podcast, guys. We'll catch you in the
Yeah.
next one. That's a wrap.